Okay, so I'm afraid I'm gonna read from this because I'm not used to talking quite like this. I'm Alex Walker, you've just learnt that. I'm involved in the art of storytelling through the medium of design, as you've just heard. For the past 20 years, I've art directed and designed sets and props for both large and small feature films. When asked to participate in this discourse about the art of storytelling, I was particularly struck by how intrinsic the following statements have been my experience as a designer and filmmaker. Construction and sharing of stories is an inherent aspect of being human and making sense of the world. And storytelling is a way of world building. My desire to share a story and try to make sense of human experience is first inspired by the script. It's the Bible, the spine of the story for all the filmmakers to explore in their respective disciplines. The script organizes the story in a world which myself and my team will then construct and visually augment. I am trying to identify the world for the audience in order to create a specific journey through space and time alongside the characters and their story. Space and time, or what is sometimes referred to as the fourth dimension, a dimension in addition to length, breadth, and depth. What can a space tell an audience about what has happened in it? What choices can we make about that space in order to anticipate what is yet to happen? The timeline of the world being created is likely to be longer than the timeline of the script. The script charts sometimes just a few moments in that world, but as the designer, I am asking what has happened, what is its history, but also maybe considering what might happen to it in the future. This works in conjunction with the script and so is key to first investigate the story of the world. It occurred to me that perhaps a film designer is like a narrator. The act of telling people what happened becomes a way to communicate experiences to each other through tale, through anecdote. In my case, relaying visual anecdotes to help tell that story. So what is a visual anecdote if it isn't verbally shared? For me, it's interesting to seek out reminders of what we've seen before, but also explore beyond into the unfamiliar, exploring figures or shapes in space, light and mood, nostalgia, ephemera, its symbols, signals, and associations, certain combinations of colours and patterns, objects, cultural origin, blended cultures, fabrics. There we go. Do that one in upon the floor. Thank you. That's all right. Woo! Oh, both, everything. All went down. Right. Okay. World building. World building is in the medium of film can be fantastical but also naturalistic. Told through live action or animation, based in a studio or entirely on a location. In order to illustrate the art of my approach to building a design narrative, I will refer to a stop frame animation project, The House, which I designed for Netflix during lockdown. It's an anthology of 3 stories set somewhere in the UK and aptly named Story 1, 2 and 3. These were directed by 4 different directors. I designed one house and its environment relating to all 3 films. This involved varying narrative spaces, time periods and inhabitants, both human and animal. Characters of different scales and proportions. Crucially, the house needed to evoke a feeling of being another character in its own right. This series of slides shows a selection of the first images I sought to establish visual links and connections to the 3 stories beyond the script. It initially involved looking at existing locations and historical buildings, what has been and what can happen to a building and its surroundings. Really struggle with this, aren't I? Ooh, let's try that. Here we go. Can you hear me? Yeah. Story 1. It is mid-19th century, and we see our main characters leave their humble cottage and make a journey up to a house being built on a hill that's been curiously gifted to them by a mysterious architect. Story 2. We've propelled forward 100+ years and see the house in a now built-up townscape being renovated by an aspirational and zealous property developer. That would be good. I did spot that earlier, I should have said. Thank you. Story 3. It's now some point in the near future. The house is the last remaining after extensive and dramatic flooding over a number of years. The house has been made into bedsits in an attempt to manage its demise. Something needs to change for the house to survive. Oops. These illustrations were conceived early in the process to establish the first bit of world building, exploring the house's journey through time and space across all 3 stories, comprising firstly on the left of a house on a hill, solitary and surrounded by trees. Secondly, a century has passed and it's become a residential town on the same hill. Lastly, maybe a decade has passed and only a few town rooftops now remain visible on the surrounding hilltops, leaving the house solitary again and exposed to the elements. This image, thank you, this image became a central reference for the directors. Oops, not yet. This image became a central reference for the directors and I. A stairwell features as the main connective narrative space to appear across all the films, and therefore a motif for the audience to recognize. Collectively, we all responded to how much this image told us about light and scale, proportion and aspect. It gave us a starting point to journey through the house. I could then map out the interiors to ensure the narrative spaces worked for each script. Shown here, comprising the stairwell with a cupola directly above and featured in the finale of Story 3. Now the wider world building has begun. The research for visual anecdotes continues. What elements do I want to recreate that are imbued or inherent in a space? What are the details that provide information, a backstory about a character? In the next slides, I have focused on the genesis of design in Story 3 particular, and tried to convey the process of anecdoting with reference, architectural drawings and illustrations to communicate the other visual narrators involved in building the world. Among others, draftspeople, painters, carpenters, plasterers, prop makers, graphic and concept artists, set decorators and dressers, are all making important visual choices to establish and tell the story. Story 3 is the chapter in the story of the house when we witness its decay. The characters are trying to make a home in a space which is falling apart. I was interested in looking at the texture of the building, layers of imprint and mark making on the walls. Then I wondered what the main character Rose's living space and objects would tell us about her, to imbue it with emotional memory, the past. Experimenting with paint and texture samples to show aging, seeing our figure in the space as it's being built, trying combinations of fabric together, arranging selected objects on a surface, seeing what works and what doesn't. Gradually, through exploring each narrative space, I started to build up a visual story of the house and its inhabitants. Jen is Rose's tenant. I liked the story that she attempts to grow food rather hopelessly on an island with no soil, well, not much soil, which would bringing her failing allotment into her interior space. It connects the audience with the exterior, which perilously starts to flood as the water continues to rise and enter her greenhouse. I needed to find a way for the house to eventually liberate from its potential demise. Simultaneously, Rosa is forced to recognize she has to move on too. My challenge was to consider how our house could become an ark, a boat to sail away. The cupola motif established early on gave me the visual ingredients for the story to develop, allowing a magical real narrative to carry us through space and time. To conclude, I have included some images from Story 1 and Story 2 to briefly illustrate the narrative space connections with the three journeys. Like chapters in a book, narrative space must work editorially across the film, or in this case, in all three stories. So I'll just click through some of these and you can see how the three films were linked in sort of significant spaces. That's it.
That was beautiful, and I'm sure whoever has not seen House, or whoever has, would relate to the movie very differently after listening to how she framed each and every frame of that story. Thank you, Alexandra. Any question? Yeah.
Thank you. I currently study product and furniture design. Have you got any advice on how to get into prop design or art direction?
You can. Ooh, is that going to work? Can you hear me? Come and talk to me afterwards.
Awesome. Will do. Thank you.
Anybody else? Or you?
Thank you for that speech. There's so much detail in that, and I can't believe that was all achieved in lockdown, so it's absolutely incredible. I was interested to know, how do you know what works effectively? How are you telling the story to its best potential in what you've visually represented?
I don't think you ever really know until the story is edited and put together. It's a risk you take. But I think when you work with amazing craftspeople who know their craft and they know materials and they know what they're working with, it's intuitive. A lot of it is intuitive. So you know, images and references become a sort of common language, but really you kind of get that out the way. It's hard to sort of describe the process without having everybody here that's making stuff and painting and scratching at a bit of plaster for 3 hours, or wrapping a set in fabric and ironing it on to see what happens. So ideally you want to be in a situation where you can experiment and play and find it out together. And very often, as a group of people, you stand and you just know. I mean, a little bit what you were saying is that you kind of just need to have the materials in front of you, and it kind of just happens. But I guess people who have done it for a long time bring that wisdom and bring that skill and knowledge of their materials and textures, and so you heavily rely on that as a designer. You're only as good as the people you work with, really.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one more interesting, and I mean, you create sets for movies, but you are an architect, a set designer, a prop collector, a composition, an artist, everything put together. Yes, you have, I mean, that's each and every frame, the way it balances out, and that narrates a story which you want to narrate. You also have a director sitting on your head who's trying to say, hey, this is my plot, don't miss it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. You've also got the director's story, so that sometimes can be the biggest noise in the room.
Exactly.
But then you also have actors who have a story as well, so that's a whole other ball game.
Great, thank you.